Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am joined by my co-hosts Alex and Dana to break down your horoscopes for the month of September. I'm really excited to be looking at a couple of really big events this month. We're going to be looking at the lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces that's happening. This is the first of a series of eclipses that will come once the nodes change signs. So for now, this is an out of sign lunar eclipse, but we're going to look at that for all of your horoscopes today. And then we're also going to be looking at Mars's entrance into Cancer, because Mars is going to spend about 6 of the next 8 months in the sign of Cancer, including a long retrograde. So we thought we might as well start unpacking that today, since that journey really begins this month. So that will be our agenda for today. But before I get into it and invite my co-hosts onto the show with me, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you haven't heard lately, we're trying to get to 70,000 subscribers by the time of the fall equinox. We've actually doubled our monthly subscription average, which is fantastic. So for those of you who listen, it's free to subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. You get notifications and updates on your YouTube app when new videos drop. And obviously it helps our channel to grow, our community grow, our business to grow. So we really appreciate it. Transcripts of any of these daily talks can be found on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. I want to point out a few things that are happening there right now. I'm going to take you over to the website. A couple of cool things. One is that if you look at the courses page and go down to Masterclass series, my final masterclass for the year begins this Friday. It is a 4-part series called The Magician's Apprentice. And in this class, we are going to be looking at the archetypes of the astrologer. What kind of astrological archetype do you fit as an astrologer or a student of astrology? We're going to talk about how you can identify what type of astrology, what type of astrologer you might be in your birth chart, as well as we're going to be doing a bunch of case studies of famous astrologers and some of the major signatures of professional astrology that we see in birth charts. We're also going to talk about all of the different ways that astrology can express itself in and through us. And there's a whole realm of the archetypes of the astrologer. So we're going to be reflecting on that in this series. You can sign up for that on the website. It's part of a series that I do where I'm doing a quarterly masterclass, but you can sign up a la carte for any one of them. So if you've missed the rest in the year, you can just hit this one, and they're recorded. If you can't make it live, all the dates and details are listed on the masterclass page. If you're interested in previous masterclass series, click on the shop page and you'll find the archives. You can bundle together 2023's series or this year's series, or any of the individual series that you want, as well as previous webinars that I've done. This month, if you go to live events under the events tab, you'll see that we have finished. We did the 8th house talk. That was our August talk. In September here, we are doing Venus's 12 love languages. So check that one out and hope to see you there for that on September 19th. If you can't make it live, of course, it's recorded. So anyway, those are my announcements for the day. I'm really excited to be taking a look at our horoscopes for the month of September. I'm getting ahead of myself here. And to do that with me, I'm going to call onto the show Dana and Alex. Hello.
Hey.
Hey, we're back.
We're back. Yeah. I'm so glad that you guys are here with me each month to do this. It's been really fun. Dana, we've gotten a ton of really amazing feedback. People just love you. So Alex and I are really happy to. Alex and I have been doing this, I think, for like a year and a half or so.
Yeah.
And then, Dana, you've been, I think this is your second or third month?
My third. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you bring something really great to the breakdowns of all of the horoscopes. We're just really glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So before we get into some of the major events for September, I'm just curious to hear what August was like for both of you. We had that very intense Uranian full moon with the big mutable T-square that we were breaking down last month. Like, what did you guys notice?
August felt to me like I was put in a pinball machine and just knocked around for a little while. It wasn't all bad, but it was just like, I'm going to surrender any like semblance of control because I have none, and I'm just going to let the pinball machine take me where it needs to go. That's just where I wound up. Yeah.
That's a good way to say it. I have, like you, Alex, a lot of mutable energy in my chart. And I mentioned in the last breakdown, the 19th, the wildest day of the month, was my first day of school at my job as a teacher. And I was so nervous, but I was also like, what can I do about this? Like, I just got to roll with it. And the worst thing that happened was I couldn't connect to the projector and I didn't have internet for the first hour of the day, which was not great. But I also was like, you know what? I can deal with this. So
Sometimes you're like, I'll just take that. I'll take that. Cool. Yeah. If that's what it's
Yeah.
going to be, I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and sometimes it's so peripheral too, where it's like you notice the chaos around you. It's not necessarily hitting you as hard, but it might be hitting someone at work or your friend or family member or something. I thought it was interesting that both Ashley and I saw the manifestation of that very powerful full moon with the T square, the Jupiter Saturn dynamic, all play out with some family members, much more so than ourselves. But what's crazy about it is that around the time of the full moon, I had a dream about some things happening for family members. And then we came to find out maybe like a week or two later that they had all gone through this incredibly tumultuous period. So it was weird. It's just weird how, I don't know. I mean, we're all connected. The dream space is an interesting space where you can sometimes connect to stuff like that. But it was more so spread out through our families, which was not exactly what I anticipated, but like, I'll take it because July with Uranus on my ascendant personally, I was like, I could take a little break. I'm good.
Yeah.
When your house was almost demolished by that giant tree.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the Jupiter Saturn square is that I was, personally, I was really, really impressed by how many dots I started connecting back to the 2020 conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, which we kind of mentioned last month. But for me, what was really interesting was that even though, the Jupiter Saturn are in two new houses, two new signs, Gemini and Pisces, and the conjunction was in Aquarius, so much of what the Jupiter Saturn square was about had to do with reforming various systems and structures within the school, the Nightlight Astrology school, which was really cool, but it related back to the conjunction, which happened in my 10th house, right? So it was almost like it was tied more intimately to the house of Aquarius than I anticipated. I thought that was kind of neat too. Yeah. Well, we have two big events this month that we're going to be looking at, and let me just pull up the real-time clock so we can take a look. Okay. Epic Pen is, there's Epic Pen hiding in the corner. Okay. So here you can see the full moon lunar eclipse forming right here. It's a few degrees early. Actually, I'm going to move this forward just a couple of hours. I can get it exact. Here we go. So the thing that I find interesting about this full moon, lunar eclipses are always full moons. Solar eclipses are always new moons, for those who don't know. And we can see that the proximity to the node is about 12 degrees. Anything below 18, you get a partial, the closer it is, I believe, the more total it is. I think that's correct. But regardless, this is a partial lunar eclipse happening in late Pisces with an application to Neptune in the making at the time of the eclipse. Sun is, of course, then opposing Neptune at the same time. That's a pretty significant lunar eclipse with a real Neptunian lunar eclipse. So I want to hear your thoughts about that before we go on. We're going to have one other transit that we're going to look at, but just general thoughts that you guys have about this lunar eclipse in Pisces with Neptune so active.
In a word, longing. Neptune just gives me deep longing and a spiritual longing, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I love that word, Dana. And I also think of like contemplative, especially because, the moon's pretty far away from Saturn by degree, but the moon's wedged between Saturn and Neptune. And that's a very sort of inner contemplative, meditative type of aspect. But also like an interesting, it could be very expansive and imaginative and get you into thinking about things on planes and dimensions you never considered, but can also be a place where you feel kind of foggy and confused and tired or isolated. There's also a possibility here with this eclipse, I think, of like a sense of feeling like that longing and isolation, that feeling of isolation. And that's often I find something with Neptune transits when I see them in practice, that type of feeling.
Yeah, I think of the word overwhelming, and how overwhelming can be so many different things depending on what's overwhelming. Your love is overwhelming. It's amazing. It's like you're flooded by emotions, affection, love, compassion, forgiveness. Like, what are we being flooded and overwhelmed by? And I think it's going to look different for different people. But I just think of that kind of flood of Neptunian emotions. And I always think, I learned a lot about this in India, the full moons and aspects being talked about, like the karma that's blossoming on the tree, like a fruit that's coming to ripen on the vine. And so full moons are like this big ripen. Here's a big emotional, watery Neptunian fruiting or blossoming. It has some history behind it because it's with a node. When it's with the North Node in particular, I think about what we have to let go of, or what kind of transitions are happening, or what kind of overwhelm we're experiencing that's somehow tied to that new direction that the North Node in Aries wants to go in. It is connected to that pioneering impulse of Aries still to go in a new direction. But in order to go there, it's like the prerequisite is that we get flooded or overwhelmed by something, or that we come to, like I love that idea of longing for something that comes to my mind. Yeah. So I think this is going to be also has a chance to be a really mystical and kind of otherworldly, or even like romantic kind of full moon.
Yeah, you can see, like, in a lot of the mystical traditions, Adam, the devotional traditions, that idea of being overwhelmed by the spirit of source or God, or overwhelmed with compassion, or overwhelmed with, sorrow. There's so many, I love that way of looking at overwhelmed from like a lot of dimensions, because it really can be, especially with Neptune, it could just be like, I've been flooded with sort of grace or love or compassion, and that can really change the way you see the world in your life and what you want to do. It's a very powerful thing to happen when it does happen.
You guys are making me think about surrender again. We were talking about that before we even got into this eclipse, but I was sort of thinking about Jupiter being the ruler of Pisces here, and Jupiter in Gemini also having the capacity to be overwhelmed by the details in Gemini. So that idea seems to be coming up over and over again as we are talking more about it. And I wonder if where Virgo is in our charts, if that might be a place where we can find a little bit of grounding, especially with Mercury there. Let's hope.
Yeah. And also when I think about the superior square that Saturn has to Jupiter, I wonder, just kind of pulling this all into a superior square with Jupiter, but Jupiter's the host. It puts a great strain on Jupiter in Gemini to provide an answer for something, or provide a rationale or an understanding or an intellectual articulation of something that might be too hard to put into words, or where you have to make use of a resource, or you have to make a choice and do something, and you're not acting on a 100% explainable criteria. It's like, it's an inclination, it's an instinct, it's a sense of emotional obligation, it's some other kind of rationale that's pulling on me. And it's like maybe part of what we're thinking or dealing with is like not totally defendable on a rational level, or it's only partially able to be explained by the rational mind.
Yeah, those Neptunian experiences can often, people struggle to explain them. There's a struggle to put into words or point towards it, or sometimes it's like, I just can't put into words what that is, but I know what I know, or I know the experience I had, or I know. And I think Mercury, Dana, like you were saying, Mercury in Virgo this month, in its strongest position, arguably in the zodiac, can be very helpful for discernment, because I think this is an eclipse where you could get lost in the fog a little bit, or lost in the overwhelm experience. And that ability to discern, Mercury can really support Jupiter. If we go down the host chain here in the chart, there's that ability to just be like, well, at least I'm discerning, is this like just a feeling? Is it just an inclination? Or is it some kind of other confusing aspect of my mind that's coming in? That's a very powerful ally this month, Mercury's placement, I think.
Yeah, Mercury's opposition to Saturn at the time of the eclipse comes to mind too. It's like, are we reaching the ends or limits of what the rational mind can do, or are we calling for some kind of balance? A balance between the intuitive, the psychic, the otherworldly and mystical, and then the more rational and intellectual levels of things to come together for some meaningful work to be done. I could also see it's sort of like you make the little columns of pro and con, right? And you fill them all out with some decision or something that you're looking at. And I could see this being a moment where it's equal. And it's like, I could make a great case for either. So how do I make the decision? And I was actually just talking about this with my Jungian therapist. And he said something when I was telling him about this and a decision that I have to make in my own life. And I was like, gosh, I could see both sides, and he was saying, Jung said that there's something called the transcendent function, and it sometimes arrives when you are in just such a pickle, and it places your perspective into a totally different like level or dimension of consciousness, often completely unrelated to the problem, something that will trigger this different shift in consciousness. And then all of a sudden, even though this thing you experienced isn't literally connected to the problem you're trying to solve, the perspective shift that's happened through something else affords you a completely different view of the problem. And then all of a sudden, you know exactly what to do. And it has nothing to do with the rational level of the pros and cons on your list. It doesn't discard them either, but it's not rooted in them fundamentally. And I thought, like, that was really, I love that explanation. First of all, it's very useful for myself personally, but then it comes to my mind in this situation with, Mercury opposing Saturn. Well, we've got this Neptunian overwhelm, but then it's ruled by Jupiter and Gemini. It kind of feels like a similar situation.
100%, especially because it's an eclipse. I mean, expect the unexpected.
Right. Good point. And do you find I don't feel like I'm alone in this, and I feel like a lot of astrologers have pointed this out. I find that sometimes the day of the eclipse, or like right around the eclipse, within close proximity of a few days, things really pop. Other times, I feel like it's like a sequence of dominoes tipping, and sometimes it takes a couple of lunation cycles for those really unexpected dimensions of the eclipse to play out. And we don't always, if you're in the habit of tracking astrology, you're probably aware of it, but we don't always recognize that a month, 2 months after the eclipse, the topics that we're talking about, remember them, because it may take a few lunations before it all sort of appears or plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely find them more process oriented. I'm going to say that with my fingers crossed, knocking on wood and staging the house, but definitely right. I find them more. Well,
I mean, I will. Go ahead.
I was just saying, even the Aries eclipse, which was such a massive energy this year. It was really profound on that day. You could feel it on that day, but there were lots of things that were lining up even over the summer that I could trace back to that April 8th eclipse.
Yeah. Well, the March 25th eclipse, I think it was, in Libra, that landed pretty much right on my natal Jupiter, which is my 8th house ruler. And it's conjoined with Saturn, Jupiter is in my chart, who's the 9th house ruler. And so 2 teachers and mentors of mine since March have died this year. The man who published my book was my agent, editor, like literary coach, very influential kind of elder figure in the ayahuasca world that I was in for a long time. And then Jeffrey Cornelius, who just passed. In both cases, those 2 figures played very important roles in my development professionally. And they were like teachers and mentors. 9th house ruler conjoined Jupiter in the 6th. They got sick and died. Jupiter rules my 8th. And that eclipse landed right on the Jupiter. But the point I'm trying to make is that the deaths that occurred, which fit perfectly with that lunar eclipse symbolism, happened like 4 and 6 months later. You know what I mean? So it takes a little bit. And it usually also continues to happen while the eclipses happen, which makes this eclipse in Pisces so interesting, because we haven't even gotten the nodes into Pisces yet. So this eclipse and a subsequent series of eclipses in Pisces are really going to have a long-lasting impact on us.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, on that note, are you guys ready to start?
Oh yeah.
All right, let's do it. I already spaced. Is it Alex? Are you taking Cardinal? Yeah. Okay. Hold on.
Let's go, Aries.
Wait a second. We forgot the second transit. Mars into Cancer. So that was.
We had a very Aries moment there.
I know. We got so jazzed about the lunar eclipse. The second transit that we are going to present through all 12 horoscopes, and I'll say another thing about horoscopes before we go in. I jumped the gun there. Mars is also entering Cancer this month. Let's roll this back just a bit so we can see the entrance. So here is September 4th, Wednesday, Mars entering Cancer. The reason this is a big deal is that Mars is going to spend from the beginning of September all the way until the beginning of November, about 2 months in the sign of Cancer. Mars will then retrograde in December and comes back into Cancer early January, where Mars will then stay through its retrograde and then direct motion all the way until late April. So we're talking about September to April. Mars is in Cancer except for 2 months, right? So that's a long stretch of Mars in Cancer. This is a debilitated place for Mars. It's a very sensitive place for Mars. It's a very powerful place for Mars in certain ways too. Tell us about Mars in Cancer. Both of you, I know, have really good thoughts about Mars in Cancer. What kind of archetypal combination this brings forth?
This is a ride or die. This is the friend that's going to get in a fist fight for you. Like, that's what I think about with Mars in Cancer. So right. Passionate.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, super protective, mama bear, papa bear energy. But also, I found with people who have Mars in Cancer in practice, very emotionally sensitive. There's a sort of peak emotional experience where there's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's like the needle of Mars makes their emotional world very, very sensitive, very, very able to be provoked. And that's not always a provocation towards a fight. It's a provocation towards like an expression. And often towards, I find in Cancer, protection and emotional protection, family protection, protection of, like you were saying, Dana, like the friend who's going to be like out in front of you and the bully's in front of you, like ready to like take them on. It is a very powerful placement for Mars. It's a place where Mars is uncomfortable, though, because of Mars's relationship to the moon. And Mars generally wants to move forward really fast, wants to assert, wants to bring forth its will. The moon generally wants to harmonize, pull together, come back, be a little more protected, be a little bit more inside of a safer emotional space. So it's an interesting tension with Mars and Cancer for sure.
Yeah, there's that feeling of Mars wanting to cut. And with the sign of Cancer, so like one great theme would be like there's one place where Mars and the moon cut and it makes sense, which is like the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord has to be cut for the baby to come into the world on its own. And so anything that is emotionally regressive is often cut or severed by Mars and Cancer. The emotionally needy, regressive parts of ourselves are often addressed by Mars's transit through Cancer. And that's not easy because those are vulnerable, fussy places for all of us, and sometimes rooted also in trauma. In, not everything that we are regressive about emotionally, or that, not every person who has a hard time standing on their own 2 feet, being independent or individuating, is doing so because they're just needy and immature. A lot of it also comes from trauma. And it's difficult to individuate and to not reach for things maybe in a way that is regressive or codependent or what have you, when you have a lot of baggage. So it's a sign that can bring up there's a lot of like exploration of emotional trauma, emotional history, family karma, family strife, the relationship between mothers. I think it's fascinating that every time Mars and Cancer comes up, the conversation about the laws surrounding a woman's right to choose how she will handle her pregnancy comes up. And the advocacy for the child, the advocacy for the woman's right. It's like, I'm not saying which side anyone ought to stand on. I'm just saying archetypally that is Mars in Cancer. I have my own opinions about that. I'll leave it out. But my point is that those kinds of fights and battles come up, and people are obviously very divided about that in the United States. But it's that kind of like sensitive, vulnerable places deal with hostile and dangerous energies. Those things come together, which can provoke amazing growth and maturation. I think of a couple of bodybuilders that I've trained with who have Mars in Cancer. I thought that's so funny that they have Mars in Cancer. They're like the pinnacle of their sport. You know, why would they have Mars in Cancer? Well, because both of the ones I'm thinking of who has Mars in Cancer, when they were kids, they were scrawny, they were picked on. So they rose up and said, no, I'm not going to be scrawny. I'm not going to be picked on. I am going to be really, really strong, and I'm going to develop my physique and be a champion. So a lot of Mars in Cancer is also about overcoming some perception that you're weak sometimes. You know, that doesn't have to be like that, but that can be part of it too.
You know, another fascinating example of Mars in Cancer too, Adam, is Stephen King. Has Mars, you know, that same type of idea, like, you know, you can tell like some stuff happened to Stephen King. Whatever his writing, you can feel is so cathartic, and his fears that he writes out. And a lot of his books are about like going back to a town that's a small place where you grew up, very Cancerian environment, but something invaded it, or something was violent within it, or something had happened where there's a sort of need to break the bond with that space. There's so many themes like that. It's just, he just comes to mind as one that I know off the top of my head. You can see it in his work really powerfully.
Yeah, I teach his chart in a bunch of my classes, and like I always say, you know, Mars in Cancer is getting taken care of when you're in an accident by a tender old lady, but it's misery, you know. That's can't, you know, or it's like you are a kid and you find a clown, but it's it. You know, it's there's always this little turn of terror in something. Cujo, the dog, the family dog. Pet Cemetery, the family cats and dogs. Carrie, you know, the that's very Mars in Cancer, right? She has her period and she develops all these psychic powers. So it's like his whole like archetype with Mars in Cancer. So this is his 10th house ruler and his 5th house ruler. So his creativity and his career connected through that archetype. But anyway, I could go on and on because he's one of my favorite writers. So
me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, anything you want to add, Dana?
I mean, that was so good. You all just made me think about sort of an emotional crucible, that maybe this is a testing ground where we're going to be provoked in the area of our chart where Cancer is, and how we respond is where we can learn and grow.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. That let's use that and take us right into some delineations. Alex is going to start us off with Aries, and we're going to be looking at the whole sign house of Pisces and Cancer through each of your horoscopes. We recommend listening for your rising sign because horoscopes are made by virtue of putting each sign on the ascendant in whole sign houses and then reading the transits in that house. This means that you could listen for your sun, your moon. Hypothetically, you could listen to anything you want, but the one that will correlate with the actual positions of the houses in your birth chart will be your rising sign. So you're getting basically a transit report when you listen to your rising sign, which I find, and most traditional astrologers find, to be the most useful, but you really can listen for whatever you want to. So on that note, Alex, with Aries, take us away.
So this is an interesting one. So you have for Aries rising, you have the lunar eclipse happening in your 12th house in Pisces. You have Mars moving into Cancer in your 4th house. In your 4th house, this strikes me as that this month it will ask you, or over the next couple of months, particularly with Mars and Cancer, to do some things that may feel uncomfortable to an Aries, which is to slow down and move back into a more introspective, private, maybe even, the word retreat keeps coming to mind with that eclipse. There's a sense of like wanting to retreat back, maybe be a little bit more isolated, and working through, with Mars moving through the 4th house in Cancer, is maybe some of the things we were talking about, which is thinking about, you know, an Aries wants to be immediate and assert and move forward. But are there aspects of where you've come from, your ancestry, your family of origin, that are still binding you, and you're not sure that you're not aware that they're binding you? This is sort of the 12th house married with the 4th house, and that Mars can actually be a really great ally if a little bit uncomfortable in this space, because it can sever it, like we were talking about, it can sever some of those bonds, or Adam, like you were saying, the umbilical cord. But it requires, in water signs, the ability to slow down and be in your more intuitive space. And it may feel like you're being a little bit more private or withdrawn. You may notice people around you may be noticing that, because Mars is your ascendant ruler. So it will maybe more outwardly apparent in the way you're presenting yourself. But this need to just slow it down for a little bit. reach back inside, go into your emotional sphere, check out where are the places in my subconscious, or where am I still bound to things that are holding me back, which may be creating a friction for an Aries rising particularly, that once you sever that and you move through it, you really feel like the relief moved through you and you can rocket ship out to wherever you want to go.
You want to add anything, Dana?
Yeah, I was just thinking, loved all of that, Alex. I was looking at Virgo in the 6th and thinking about the routines, the daily rituals, the daily wellness. Like, how are you taking care of your body? That might be a good way in to the more uncomfortable emotional spaces that may be coming up, and just be a more accessible way to deal with these energies, like as Alex said, that are not where we naturally want to go, maybe if we're an Aries rising.
Right. Yeah, I think about this as emotional irritants. You know, like what I think one of the things we can always look at is that juxtaposition between the 1st and the 12th, and just say if Aries is trying to build self-confidence, individuation, strength as core themes, a sense of having your own authority, and the word sovereignty comes to mind as strong, maybe a little exaggerated words for Aries rising. Well, Pisces in the 12th overwhelms it. It overwhelms the lunar eclipse with the Neptune. It kind of overwhelms your sense of self. Things that the flooding, the overwhelm, and then those emotionally tender and vulnerable spots with Mars and Cancer in the 4th. It together makes me feel like you're going to have to look at the fly in the ointment and the stuff that overwhelms you that you can't control or manage. And by learning new ways of dealing with those things, we can find that we aren't actually being threatened, that our individuality, our freedom, our own autonomy is not actually at threat if we learn new ways of dealing with these big and more intangible qualities or more vulnerable hotspots.
Love that.
I love that. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Taurus. Dana's going to be taking our fixed signs. I'll just highlight the houses here. Here's our eclipse in the 11th. Here's Mars in Cancer in the 3rd.
Awesome. Okay, Taurus risings. I was thinking a lot about creativity here because we're on the 5th and the 11th axis, and we've got Mars in your 3rd house of communication. And I just kept thinking about creativity and communication coming up. With the moon in your 11th house and Saturn and Neptune here, it's a couple of things. I first thought about the longing for what you dream and what you aspire. It's the vision, and it's this like spiritual infusion in the vision. And Saturn's here too, so there's a seriousness, there's a gravitas to it. Like, this is what I want. Damn it, I'm going to get it. And so I wonder about how your creative life and what you want to make plays a role in that, because we're in that 5th, 11th axis. What kind of routines and rituals can you create for yourself? I thought about morning pages. If you're familiar, just waking up and writing 3 pages and not worrying what the content is, maybe allowing that to ground you a little bit, thinking about what's going on in the 5th. And then in the 3rd house with Mars, I'm thinking about communication and having something important to say. So that could be linked to the eclipse and what comes up there, and grounding whatever important realizations we're having through how we're communicating, how we're talking. And really even just how we live our daily lives, cutting out the routines that are not working for you anymore, that are getting in the way of that big dream and that big vision. So that's what came to mind for me.
Nice.
I love that, Dana. I think I was also thinking about that eclipse from the perspective in the 11th house of the culmination of maybe feeling, for a Venus ruled sign as a Taurus rising, you've had Uranus in your 1st house since 2018. There's something to me too about the culmination of feeling too merged with groups, maybe, or feeling like there haven't been enough boundaries or there's a whole bunch of individuation things going on here in a kind of a murky setting. The Mars in the 3rd house, Uranus in the 1st, and then this eclipse in the 11th. I'm wondering about also feeling like a culmination point has been reached within a group or within your social networks where it feels like I need to break out a little bit more and just be me, or I need to break out a little bit more and be a little bit outside of the convention, the merging quality that Neptune and Pisces and Saturn all that can bring. And I think, I love that with Mars in the third house too. I think, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to make a Matrix reference here. I've tried to get through these recordings without a Matrix reference. But Mars here really strikes me as the splinter in the mind. It's like that idea of, this thing that just starts to hit you in your mind, like, I can't let this go. There's something that needs to break out or be severed or be cut within the sort of everyday convenience of my mind that I've created, my habits, that something needs to be retooled in some way or cut
Yeah.
loose. Yeah.
I wonder about the feeling of being after, by the way, because I'm thinking of Saturn in the 11th house as possibly representing a sense of being in exile socially. Like there's maybe a sense of not having a lot of friends or not feeling quite right about the friends or groups of people or something. And I wonder if this eclipse doesn't start creating that longing that Dana was talking about earlier for a different kind of friendship, a different kind of social life, a different kind of group, or different social circles or something. It doesn't start creating the longing while also starting to amplify some sense of cultural or environmental dissatisfaction with Mars in the third.
Yeah.
So that you're almost starting to think like, I need to change something about my environment and my social life. And it's unclear what it is, but the dissatisfaction or the overwhelm or the feeling of needing a sea change is starting to rise. That comes to my mind because I think when you see those oppositions to the fifth, you're also thinking about, needing to include your creative essence in your social or environmental life. And there's some tension around that somehow.
Yeah.
For sure. It's a lot of goddess this month.
Yeah.
A lot of goddess. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much water, especially once Venus gets into Scorpio too. Okay. Let's go to Gemini and, hold on. I need to just close one window. There we go. Okay. So once we get to Gemini, we have the lunar eclipse with Neptune in the 10th, and we have Mars in Cancer in the 2nd. And I think this one is pretty straightforward. I think at the worst, I could see people losing their jobs and having financial troubles, or some like contractors are not coming through, or there's less money coming through work than you're used to. So I could see the worst of the worst in this instance for Geminis would be the quality of dissolution and the kind of hard Saturn reality of the 10th house at times, with a Neptune, kind of like a dissolution of contracts or bonds or failures or weaknesses or, kind of illusions that are coming to the surface around career, while Mars in Cancer is highlighting a feeling of being in need financially. I don't have the resources I need. I'm working hard to get them, but I'm feeling like I've bottomed out somehow, or I'm experiencing some kind of difficulty. On the other side, to be more constructive, because I think many people will also experience some really constructive things around this, we could see something like the dissatisfaction, the sense of longing again, creating some need to change money, finances, and work-related matters. I need different resources. I need different tools. I need to cultivate different things at work. And I have a new vision or a sense of longing that's starting to inform me and my direction professionally and financially. And I'm going to follow that. I'm going to start moving toward that. Even if I'm starting from the ground level, I'm going to build my way up, which Mars in Cancer can actually be really good at, because it'll have that emotional wherewithal to get going and really go after it. So those are kind of the two angles that I'm taking on this one. What do you guys think?
I definitely agree with what you said about Mars. There's something about it that's just like brute force. Like, regardless of the facts, I'm going to do what I set out to do. And so regardless of, the spectrum of how this could play out, I think that that's on your side in the second house for Gemini risings. There's something that can really help you get to where you're going.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think, you guys, I think, explored those aspects really well. I'm just, looking at the really helpful to have Mercury right in exaltation and rulership and your ascendant ruler this month. Really, really helpful to have that along for the ride, because I think that this might be, whatever happens that might be challenging around what we were just talking about, there's a lot of support in the reshaping of your identity around this. And you've got Jupiter sitting there in your first house too. There's some support around the corner or behind you with it too, for sure.
Nice. I'm going to move us forward. We'll put Cancer on the ascendant, which puts our Pisces Neptunian eclipse into the 9th and Mars into the 1st.
All right, Cancer, as we say here in Boston, in Mass. By the way, living in Massachusetts is literally like living in a state that is full of Mars. It's just a Mars state. Anyways, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But anyways,
True.
I'd have to bring it up. I had to bring it up. All right. So, Cancer, I think this is really interesting. I could see this month having, Dana, I'm loving that word longing. And I feel like in the 9th house, this is really kind of like the spiritual longing, the religious longing, if you're part of a religion, or if that's part of your belief system. There's something about like, I want to become at one with things. There's a desire to sort of unify one's belief system, or maybe, Saturn and Neptune too can be a dissolution of one's belief system. You've reached the end of the road with this eclipse of, I have believed one way for a long time, and now I'm coming to the end of that. I've had one way of thinking, and then Saturn and Neptune wedging that eclipse is kind of like, there's a need for that to dissolve. There's an ending. There's a finality to that as well. And I think, with Mars moving through the 1st house, this may ask him for the impetus of Cancer rising is to care and nurture and surround and hold and nourish and ideas like that. And it's oftentimes can be outwardly focused, because the care instinct is often geared towards others. This Mars in Cancer, what I'm kind of getting intuitively, it might needle you to be a little selfish. You might need a little bit more time to yourself to, it's kind of like, when someone's like walking around the house and you just tell they're irritated, and you're like, are you okay? And they're like, yeah, fine. It's like, yeah, you're not fine. Okay, that's fine. But like, okay, I'm gonna leave that alone. And there might be that feeling of like, I'm irritated and I don't know why. And it might just be like, I need to do something for myself that allows me a more inner time to really focus on the shift in a more subtle level of your belief system or the way you structure the world. That's kind of how I'm seeing that this month for Cancer rising.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just add that I feel like when you've got a 9th house eclipse, the idea here that comes to my mind right away is like mystical religious experience, or some very inspired state that might be related to the desire to learn, or to travel, or to go abroad, or maybe a yoga retreat comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some impetus to reach toward higher understanding and experiential, emotionally fulfilling understanding. And so I see a religious, spiritual, kind of mystical impulse, as well as maybe expanding horizons and learning. And then when I see Mars in the 1st, I think to myself, well, sometimes this happens, because you get sick of yourself. I know that sounds kind of like mean, but it's like, well, Mars enters your first, Mars enters your first house, and you just go, you know what? Like, if I don't expand and keep growing, I'm just going to get more sick of myself. And I need to feel good about myself. And that's the weird thing about a debilitated planet like Mars in the 1st, is that it can actually be like, I don't know, it's not maybe too dramatic to say a rock bottom, but it's like a little valley. You just hit the bottom floor for a second, and you go, you know what? I need to do better. And I need to do better, and it needs to be authentic growth, spiritual growth. So I could see there being like a little emotional fuel to do some growing and expanding.
Yeah. Mm. I love that take on Mars and Cancer in the 1st. I was thinking about it just in that sort of emotional crucible kind of way. Like, a Cancer rising is not going to be one to be like, well, this is what I want. There's that caretaking energy that leads. And so Mars in the 1st is not going to feel comfortable, but I would say, like, be careful of projecting maybe, because I don't know about you guys, but it's hard for me to own my emotions sometimes. And I'll do this thing where are you feeling okay? But really, I'm not feeling okay, right? And so for Cancer risings, like pay attention to that. I feel like this is an important time to be really aware of your feelings and to get really good at communicating them and not placing them on other people.
That is great advice. As a card carrying Cancer, Sun and Mercury, I feel like that is a real thing. That thing where you go, "Are you feeling okay?" And it's like, "No, dude, you're not feeling okay. Why are you asking?" I find myself doing stuff like that, and it's such a moon thing. It's like that whole reflective quality. And the reflective quality can make other people can be very aware of the environment and be such a caretaker of the environment. But sometimes you're so used to being this little reflective dish that you don't take time to be like, oh, those are my emotions,
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Oh man.
Great advice. Solid. All right, let's go on to Leo. I am going to highlight the eclipse in the 8th and Mars in the 12th. Kind of two difficult houses, really, for Leos. But Alex is a Leo, so be good to him.
Okay.
A Leo rising, I should say.
I'll do my
Everything's
best.
Magnificent and great.
No
Amazing.
pressure, Dana.
Okay, so we've got the eclipse in the 8th house, shared resources, debts, obligations. If we're going the longing route, what dream are you building with the partners in your life? What is the thing you're trying to coalesce and bring into fruition? What are you getting really serious about? We know Saturn's here. If we're taking it the overwhelm route, it could be literal debts. It could be having to get serious about finances and having to make a plan, right? And luckily, Mercury is in your 2nd house in Virgo. So the capacity to make a strategic plan with your resources is there. I also think about that 2nd house part of this axis as what can you bring to the table? If it's not literal money, if it's not literal, finances, what do you have to offer in whatever team dynamic relationship is coming up through what the 8th house is bringing up? When we think about Mars in the 12th, I think that this has a lot of potential to be very, very helpful. Becoming aware of where you stop yourself short, where you cut yourself off from realizing your own potential. I don't know. It just makes me think of, what do we say about the 12th house? It's the place of self-undoing. It's very that. But there's the potential to really cut that out with Mars here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about this and I think to myself, okay, if I pair it together with the eclipse in the 8th, and I think about the 8th as debts, karmic debts. I just gave a talk in the 8th house that I've been really thinking about it and framing it that way a lot lately. And so that's on my mind. And I'm thinking, okay, let's just say that you're looking very deeply at karmic entanglements, the give and take of relationships, what we give each other for better or worse. And there's some shift happening around what you need from others or what they need from you, and whether you're willing to give it or whether you're willing to receive it. And there's a lot of it could be overwhelming, right? So there's that word. But then when I think about Mars in the 12th, I go, oh, and be careful, because this situation is all about how you're either undermining it by being too needy or not being giving enough or being selfish or something like that. Or on the other hand, this could be the tendency to be undermined by someone else, in that they're making unfair demands on you. They're placing pressures on you. They're coercing you. They're being demanding or overwhelming. And can you say no? Can you disentangle yourself by recognizing that this is a psychic vampire kind of energy? I need to stop the bleeding. So those are the kind of different angles that I could see coming from this combination. I think mine is more like mine feels like a Dracula novel, but sorry.
I'm gonna go hang some garlic on my window.
Yeah. I was at a vampire novel. Dracula is a novel. Vampire novel is what I should have said.
I love both of those. I'll take both of those as a Leo rising. But I think that one thing for us as Leo risings, and I will say this, and maybe I'm projecting, maybe I need to own my own emotions here because we're just talking about, but we tend to want to do it all on our own. It's I'm the king, I'm the queen, I'm the sovereign, I sit in my castle, and it's all my responsibility. You got a Virgo sun right now and a Virgo Mercury. very responsible. It's my responsibility. I have to do it. And I think that, you know, when we think about karmic debts, sometimes it can be with Leo, like I take too much, I need too much, I'm drawing to me too much, I'm the inverted sun that sucks in all the attention on light. But I think it also can be sometimes I don't receive enough. I'm not seeing what I bring to the table that is of value, and not receiving. You know, my first therapist years ago, probably 12 years ago now, he said something that I've always remembered. He said, when you try to do it all in a relationship, you make the other person feel like they're not needed or wanted. Oof. There's a sense where they can't give to you. You're not letting them in. So it's like, they're like, well, why am I here if I'm not able to give? And so I think it's kind of flipping the coin and seeing, where am I taking too much, or am I not taking enough? Am I not allowing myself to receive in? There's a lot of that kind of, and you know, with Mars in the 12th house, that can be a great ally, and just kind of lighten up the subconscious and being like, why are you doing that? What do you need to cut yourself loose from? Where does the sword need to, you know, sever some belief system that really is adding to that dynamic?
Yeah. I feel like there's such in the need to find something that makes you shine, right? There's that, which is such a Leo archetype. There's the temptation to think that you are nothing in comparison to the thing that makes you shine. And there's, on the other hand, the tendency to go to the opposite extreme and think that you are the thing that shines.
Yeah.
And so it's like, either I'm everything or I'm nothing. And I just feel like the middle ground is usually found by finding something that's worthwhile, and then also having enough, being able to be like, having enough people in your life that tell you, like, you do something great, and it's really beautiful what you do, and that you're in service to something that makes you shine. And I just love you the way you are. Like, it's such a simple thing that, like, every sign needs to hear it, but that's the way that Leo sometimes needs to hear it, in my experience.
That may or may not be happening in my psyche right now, so I'll just leave it there.
Well, me too. I've got Venus and Leo as my ascendant ruler, so it's like, occasionally, like, my wife will completely disarm me, you know, and she'll just be like, hey, I know you're doing all the great astrology, blah, 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 and you're just great. I just love you as a person. And every time it's like, it just feels like this release, because I think Leos carry that they can carry that thing where it's like, what's the phrase? Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Heavy is the head. Yeah, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Yeah, the responsibility of that. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, Leos will start talking about themselves forever if we don't shut up. So,
by the way, me and also me, and then what's happening to me. So that.
Yes. Yeah. So let's go on to Virgo, which I will take to start us with. And I'm actually going to back this up by just one day to get the moon in the right sign there. Okay. So here, the lunar eclipse is happening in the 7th house, while Mars is entering Cancer in the 11th. First of all, I think that this is a really important moment for relationships. That's the most obvious answer. And it's a good one, because it could be, now, when I say relationships, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. These can be interpersonal relationships. This can be something to do with your social life, and even how you seek out pleasure with other human beings. Like, just how do you have fun? How do you experience? This house was called Kama by Indian astrologers, which literally means bliss. And it's the place where the daytime is put to bed, and then the nocturnal space opens up, which is Venus's realm. The realm of pleasure is the evening. And so this could have something to do with bliss, sexuality, pleasure, relationships, especially with Neptune there, that signature of seeking out ecstasy. I don't think that's always easy for Virgos because of the letting go part, you know, that sense of what is best about Virgo is how dutiful and careful and meticulous and conscientious the Virgo is. There's a purity in that that's just so beautiful. And at the same time, just like every other sign, I mean, that's exactly what Pisces needs that Pisces lacked, what we just described in a sense. But on the other hand, Pisces will help Virgo just say, okay, you're taking a trip to the surrender spa where you get to bathe all day in the baths and saunas of forgetfulness, where you just don't have to be up on it all, you know. And there's maybe some call for that kind of letting go, that kind of bliss and flow, from the space of relationships or pleasure. And I wonder about that as a key theme this month. At the same time, I feel like when you see Mars in the 11th, one of the reasons that it could be hard to let go is because you might not be with some of the people might not be right.
Yeah.
It's almost like, how can I trust and surrender when I don't fully feel safe in this environment? The social environment of the 11th is connected by trine to the 7th. So we're talking about some people or things, elements of the relationships that, or even of, the way that relationships draw us into family dynamics. I remember my wife being like, why don't you feel more laid back around my family? I'm like, because there's one person in the room who's already told me they think astrology is stupid and I can't relax.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's stuff like that where you can't, there's something that it is like a little itch, I feel like here, where it might just be that you do have some reasons for holding on a little bit. You might not want to let go of everything, because that Mars in Cancer suggests to me that there could be some real perturbances and some real reasons to not feel entirely safe. But that means you can address them too. There's maybe some need to say, like, don't use this as an excuse to remain overly defended and controlled. And if you need to be doing a little bit more letting go, but at the same time, be careful and honor your instincts about people.
It makes me think, Adam, about in the yogic tradition, the idea of nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the idea of like the total release of your egoic sense and just pure awareness, and you're just kind of existing in the sort of the oneness state, the unitive state. And on kind of on the lines of what you're saying, for a Virgo, that can be very difficult because that requires you to really let go. I mean, your whole identity structure lets go, your ego structure lets go. But you have to be in a safe environment to do that. You have to be in a protected environment to do that. You have to be around teachers who know what they're doing, who can hold you and care for you and be there. It's a very lunar environment. You need to be in that sort of emergence into that sort of deep form of meditation. And this might be something where Virgos, the tendency I think with Virgos is to give the benefit of the doubt and be of service and say, it's okay, it's all right, don't worry about it. And that Mars in Cancer is going to be the irritant this month in the environment and who surrounds you in it, of like, are the people here conducive to me lying back into the ecstasy wave?
Yep.
And to try to, when you get those little, like, I call them intuitive bookmarks, like that little like or that little like that doesn't quite feel right, to listen to that and not immediately blame yourself and say, it's me, I did it, I'm something's wrong here, because that's the tendency of Virgos to do, is to just listen to those. You don't have to act on them, but just listen to them as they come up.
Right.
That's really good, Alex. You both are making me think about how other people are teachers. Always with the 1st and the 7th, it's like the mirror. Other people are showing you something of who you are. And then Mars in the 11th house of friends and groups and allies, also speaking to learning things through other people. But Alex, what you said about you don't need to take it personally. Like, let other people teach you about what you want, what you don't want, who you want to be around, who you want to be yourself. But like, make that distinction between you and other people very, very clear.
Yeah, love
for
that.
Sure.
Yeah. Virgo, moving on to Libra, and I will highlight the houses 6 and 10 for the lunar eclipse with Neptune and Mars in Cancer.
Okay. So this what Dana already knows probably where is the resident Libra rising. So I think that this could be a couple of things in the 6th house. One, it could be the culmination of and the moving on from a fairly challenging set of circumstances. The sort of Saturn moving into the 6th house, and you've just got to really not only chop wood and carry water, but you have to level the forest and carry the ocean. Like, there's a lot of that with Saturn in the 6th house. It's a very, very heavy stuff you got to do. But I think also this could be highlighting in one way or another the tendency to overly sacrifice and to not consider maybe your own need in a relationship, in relationship to other people, in the way you see yourself, to not be considering it, because the sixth house tends to be, I find, a place when people have strong sixth house placements, a place where they're overly sacrificial or hold themselves in, they feel that they're in lower regard to other people in some way. Neptune with the moon in this case might highlight that, because that can also be a very strong aspect of Neptune. But I think it also moves into, as Mars moves into your 10th house, there's also that same theme, seeing like in your reputation and how you're seen in the world, in your job, in your career. Has there been too much caretaking, giving, trying to make things work, trying to make things, make a happy home, so to speak, at the expense of yourself? It could also be on the other end of the spectrum, but I don't think it uses for Libras, because Libras tend towards, I think, more of like the other. But it could be like, where does more sacrifice need to happen? Where are you holding too much or withholding too much? You need to be like, I need to give a little bit more care here, a little bit more thoughtfulness, a little bit more attention, especially in regards to career, as those are related by trine. So those are some thoughts I have on that for this month, those two.
Nice.
I'm a little clenched for this eclipse myself, just because I have my sun is at 23 Pisces. And so I'm just a little like, what's going to happen? And what you said about chop wood, carry water, level the forest, do everything. It has been very that for me, and not to project my experience onto all Libra risings, but I am thinking and hoping that this Mars in the 10th is going to help bring some assertiveness in areas of my life where I'm normally not very assertive. Thinking about work, I work on a team with other teachers, and there's a lot of big personalities. And again, my experience is not everybody's, but I think Libra risings can all kind of relate, where we kind of feel like we're the social glue, and we kind of have to make everybody happy. And sometimes I find myself talking out both sides of my mouth, and I don't like that. I don't want to be that way. I want to have my own definitive opinion. And I'm hopeful that for all of us Libra risings, that Mars in the 10th can bring a little bit more of that.
Nice. Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind is that there is nothing like a miraculous stroke of misfortune. A miraculous stroke of misfortune. I'll say that again.
He emphasized miraculous.
Yeah. To bring something to a head that needs to be brought to a head. I think of this because although the 6th house was called the place of misfortune, to me, a lunar eclipse with Libra, a lunar eclipse in Pisces with Neptune, while the exaltation ruler Venus is in your 1st house, I think it's like one of those things that sometimes mercy intervenes with a weird thing, but immediately you go, thank you for that. This is just the excuse I needed to make a change, or this is just the kind of thing that is going to necessitate something else happening, and it's difficult. I don't want to do it, but I absolutely needed to. And you just feel like the universe kicked the right chair over at the right time. Do you know what I mean? And I get that feeling from this, where I could see this being not an easy upcoming period for Libras, let's say in the career house overall, like some challenges there. But the eclipses coming through this house with Neptune and Saturn make me feel like the discontent is boiling over. And so when Neptunian things have this they have the sense of this miraculous synchronistic, there's a synchronistic feeling to them. So I just feel like, yeah, there's going to be some difficult stuff that happens, but it's going to help bring things to a head that you're probably going to be better off without, or better off moving on from, or better off confronting, or something like that.
I call that getting a hey girl from the universe. Like, say, hey girl, I see you. I got you. You're gonna keep doing that? No, we'll just take that out. Hey girl, I see you. And then you look back a week later and say,
yeah. That is awesome. All right. Should we go to Scorpio?
Let's do it.
All right. We got Scorpio. We got the lunar eclipse here in the 5th, Mars in Cancer in the 9th.
Okay. So we're in your 5th house. And back to this idea of overwhelm and longing. longing for bringing something into the world, to creating something new for yourself, for finding more pleasure and joy. This one thing that came to mind right away, and this is maybe a little too specific, but the fifth house is where we have fun. Neptune likes to dissociate. This would probably not be a great time to be drinking a whole lot, right? Or to be like engaging in things that take you out of your body. There might be a pull to that kind of thing, to transcend as a way to have fun. And so just maybe pay attention to that. But there's definitely a drive to create and to bring something into the world. I would wonder about how your friend groups and the people you align yourself with can kind of help you make that more concrete and tangible, thinking about the Sun and Mercury in the 11th house as the other side of this eclipse. And I love Mars in the 9th. Actually, I think that this is a great opportunity to clarify what really matters to you. Thinking about the 9th house as your values, your personal philosophy, your operating principles, and realizing what's outdated and where you might be or have been making choices based on outdated principles, and you're no longer willing to do that. It might be uncomfortable to say, I no longer align or agree with that. You might have to speak up in ways you didn't really want to, but you'll be more aligned as a result.
Nice.
I love that, Dana. I think that, this creative impulse for Scorpios, there's some things you can't express verbally or in words. They have to be expressed in art, in the expression of the body, and dance. Sometimes they're expressed, with intimacy or sexual intimacy, but there's some things that are just like, they can't be expressed sort of intellectually. And I think, one of the strengths of Scorpio is the ability to drill down into something, to really go to the basement of the sub-basement of the sub-basement. And this Neptune, just speaking about this eclipse in the 5th house, it might be a wonderful opportunity in your creative pursuits or the things that bring you pleasure to experiment with really letting go of the control, really letting the muse come through you, letting the art come through you, letting the painting come through you, letting the experience come through you, and seeing if that offers, because I could see that Mars and Cancer in the 9th house being like, I like the word irritant, Adam, the idea of like irritating the way you see the world a little bit, like kind of being like, there's something that doesn't quite work in this anymore. It's a little too merged, and I need to let go in some way to allow myself to reorder the way I see the world by not having to be in control of how I draw or let the artistic or creative or erotic muse move through me in that way.
That is really fascinating. I love both of your takes, and I'm going to add one that I feel like is like kind of weird and spicy. So, okay, first of all, I will just share a little thing about Scorpio risings, because I have a few in my family and extended family, and people who I love. So this is not, I don't mean to trash talk at all, but there's a funny pattern, because I'm a Cancer, and so Cancer Scorpios have, like other signs of the same element. They usually get along, but they have like very different kind of expressions of the element. So I always find it interesting that as soon as I get like, okay, so if I'm just like being interpersonal with like a Scorpio, I'll find that there's a lot of caginess, like not showing your cards. It's just kind of hard to like get in there or whatever. But as soon as I start, I don't know, let's just say I'm making fun of someone, not to be a jerk, just like having fun. And all of a sudden, my Scorpio rising family member, companion, friend will jump to the ever merciful, ever sensitive defense of their perspective. So like, oh, you're a Scorpio, so you're like kind of cagey and Mars-like. But when it comes to looking at your beliefs, they're so sensitive. Like the worldview, the philosophy, the beliefs of Scorpios are so freaking compassionate and gentle and sensitive, even though they personally feel sort of edgy and a little barbed at times. And so, I found sometimes to trick the defenses down of some of my Scorpio family members, I'll make an offhanded comment about something that I know will engage their philosophical sensitivity. And then they'll immediately launch into a softer kind of a defense of something, which is very Scorpionic, but that compassion, that sensitivity, that that kind of gentle maternal energy will start coming out in their philosophical defense of something. And then I feel like it's easier to communicate personally after that. That's a little trick.
That is a great trick. I love that.
Yeah, I know it sounds weird, but I have lots of them because I just see the world through astrology. Anyway, so like one of the things that long-winded explanation was to get to this. I feel like this is a time where, like, if you're a Scorpio and you're trying to work on pleasure and bliss and ecstasy, that Neptunian energy in the 5th house, you're a little blocked. Saturn's there, and it's highlighting the fact that sometimes you're a little blocked around this stuff. I feel like Mars in Cancer could be just this wonderful feedback where it's like, part of the reason you have a hard time is because you're so freaking intense. You're so intense. You're such an advocate, but in order to have fun and experience pleasure, you need to chill out a little bit. You need to let go on the intensity and seriousness of some of your beliefs, even if they're important. Like, are they so important that they're going to get in the way of you relaxing enough to really have spontaneity and joy and pleasure and fun? And so, on the other hand, I could see this being about, let's say, as you were saying, pleasure goes too far. Then I could see this being emotional advocacy. Like, I have to care for myself because I've gone too far. I'm drinking too much. I'm eating too much sugar, and I'm getting to that type 2 diabetic place, and it's not good for me. Or maybe there's other people in your sphere where they're going too far with something, and suddenly you find yourself advocating like a mother for them, even though usually you might be a little bit more protected or reserved. So those are kind of the things that were coming to my mind. I wanted to explain that thing about the sensitivity of Scorpios coming through their 9th house first.
That's super helpful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I've been looking a lot at the triads. I've been spending a lot of time with the triads because I think I'm going to do a masterclass series next year on the triads, because there's so much more that we can understand through those triplicities when we start thinking about the whole sign connections between houses. So it just was my chance to also spin my wheels on something like that. All right, let's go to Sag. Let's see. We have our eclipse in the 4th while Mars is in Cancer in the 8th. Okay, so when I think of a Neptunian eclipse in the 4th house, I think of the annual flooding of the Nile. Like, it's a part of life, a rhythm of life that everyone in the ancient world that lived near the Nile and was dependent on it as a source of life everybody was used to it. They were all dependent upon it. They all knew its rhythms. They were so sensitive to its movements. I think about that, what it would be like to live, or, I'm sure it's similar for other people, like people who lived on the Amazon or something like that. But now when I use that image and I bring it into the 4th house for Sagittarians, because I think because they're both Jupiter ruled signs, Pisces and Sagittarius, but I think that sometimes Sagittarians live through the instinct or the impulse of fire. So it's like you're living based on impulses that come from, this kind of, in ancient astrology, fire was like really ethereal. So it's like this intuitive hit, this glimmer, this lightning strike and you act on those, and there's always things in motion with Sagittarians. But Pisces' way of acting is so much more about being attuned to the Nile. It's like, oh yes, I can feel everything in the environment, and I'm very sensitive. It's more like feeling the flow of the Tao or something like that in a river you live by. And so I wonder if for Sagittarians right now, things aren't conspiring to make you much more sensitive and instinctually aware of environmental movements in family, in home, in relationships, because these emotional dynamics happening in house 4 and 8 are connected to things like home, family, living environment, and then those really enmeshed dynamics with people that you're close with. And Cancer echoes the theme of family again in the 8th house and like tight emotional bonds. So I just think to myself, okay, Sagittarians who like to be free, it's not supernatural for Sagittarians to have that, that sense. Like, I think of Sagittarians as nomadic, so you can't get to know the river. You know what I mean? Like you're moving. You're not basing your life all around this one body of water. And I think that there might be some really beautiful lessons about becoming more attuned to environments and the flow and shifts and subtle changes in emotional dynamics of people and places around you.
Oh, okay. Like, you go. We were talking about codependency earlier, and that is coming up for me here. What's mine, what's not, in terms of the emotional burden to carry. The Sag risings in my life, who I love so dearly, impulsive, and maybe it doesn't feel that way to them. They're acting on what they feel, and so that's fair. But I wonder about becoming more clear on the root of that impulse, because I think sometimes we don't always investigate those feelings. We just take them as facts. And so that's what I'm thinking about with Mars in the 8th house, is like, let's demarcate, let's get a little more clear and cut off any kind of taking on other people's energy that maybe is not mine to take and act upon.
That's beautiful. Love that. And it's a kind of, it's the same like level of awareness, right? It's like when you're talking about being in touch with not just your instinct or impulse as a fact, but where does it come from? What is its roots? And then there's really that's now you're attuned to the Nile, this thing that's flowing more deeply, that's a part of you. It's a really important part of us, our 4th house, right? So it's not like you're a Sag and not another sign. It's that we're going to very consciously identify with Sag. But then there's this kind of, for Sag, there's just like Piscean river running under the current, under the surface.
This is reminding me. Have you guys seen the movie Mermaids with Cher and Winona Ryder back from the 90s?
I saw Splash. That's not the same thing.
No, it's
a different mermaid movie.
Yeah, okay.
Well, little spoilers here, but of course this is where I have to go with this. But it's very much on what we're talking about, is that Cher in that movie, whenever she encounters a problem, she packs up her kids and she moves. She just goes to another place. And she finally winds up in a place where she meets a guy she likes. The kids really like it. It's, a beautiful kind of idyllic setting. And we think about eclipses as disruptive change sometimes, which I think we think means, oh, I'm going to change places, I'm going to move places. But for a Sagittarius and that sort of archetype, the change might be, I like it here. I like to know when the Nile is going to flood and not. I like to know the rhythms of nature. I'm actually beginning to feel like the revolution, so to speak, or the shift and change might be, I just like to be here in this wonderful, tender, quiet space, and it feels really good. And it may feel very counter to the instinct with a Sag. I know, being a Sag sun, which is to just head off to the horizon. And sometimes that happens when things feel hard or enmeshed, or they're getting too intimate in some way. It feels like it's going to become restrictive, and realizing like, well, that doesn't have to mean restriction. There can be freedom still within that. So, of course, I just had to bring Cher into this. So thank you guys.
That was so good, Alex.
All right, let's go to Capricorn. And we've got our lunar eclipse taking place in the 3rd, with Mars entering Cancer in the 7th.
Is this me? Yeah, this is me. Okay, so sorry. This is by the time we start getting into Capricorn, I'm like, who's doing what? Okay. So we have this lunar eclipse in the 3rd house in Pisces. This is interesting. This strikes me as maybe a culmination of this really, and I'm not just saying this because Pisces is a water sign, like really recognizing the fish that is in the ocean doesn't know it's in water. It's like there's a sense with this eclipse of like, the 3rd house is so familiar, whether it's in our mind, it's in our everyday surroundings. There's a sense with this eclipse to me of a culmination of something in the full moon that you start to recognize, like, it sounds weird to say, but like, it's too familiar. It's too comfortable. I'm too surrounded by the familiar and getting lost in that. And there might be, with Mars in the 7th house in Cancer, that might be a little needle in relationships, in again, whether it's romantic or with other people, that's saying like, there's something here that feels not necessarily too enmeshed, but where like the caretaking role has gone too far. I'm too, I'm really trying so hard to like wrap my arms around things that feel so familiar to me. I'm so used to doing that. That's how I kind of work in relationships, or maybe that's the type of people that are drawn to me in relationships, that there's a needling in that sort of jostles loose, like, oh, this is a very familiar pattern that's been going on for so long that I haven't seen that it's a pattern. And so there's a real highlight of that this month. And I actually, again, Mars in Cancer can be, traditionally challenging, but I think it might be the needle in just the right place of being like, but are you being yourself and allowed to be yourself in relationships? And have you looked at that pattern? Has you seen that? And has it become too merged in a lot of ways? That's where I'm finding that. Yeah.
I love that, Alex. You had me thinking a bit about Neptune as the principle of escapism. And I think in a worst case scenario, we might be like, I can't, like this day to day, I can't, I need something. And, with Mars in the 7th, could that play out through relationships? Yeah. If you're not aware of that happening, like that could be something that pushes you away from the people that you love and care about. But the best case scenario would be maybe that you recognize you feel that way, if that's coming up for you, or that you're ready to delegate a little bit. I'm thinking about Saturn in the 3rd, and maybe just kind of carrying too much of the responsibility, and speaking up in your relationships for what you need is kind of coming to mind too.
Yeah. I'm going to go Agatha Christie. And we're going to look at this because Mars is just moving into this gigantic opposition with Pluto and coming off from this eclipse right here. I feel like this could be where you realize that the person you're with is a crazy person. Like you're living with a psycho. No, I'm just kidding. The reason I say this, and I'm not being a little dramatic, but it's like, the moon with Neptune in the 3rd house can very slowly, it can dawn on you that there is more than meets the eye, or that some level of illusion or deception or some lack of clarity has been taking place in your environment. And when you see that, and remember, when Mars hits the opposition to Pluto, it'll be trining the eclipse point and it'll be trining Neptune. And so I look at this and I go, what if this is when you realize you've been living with an alcoholic who's been hiding their alcohol out in the garage? What if this is when a conflict bubbles to the surface because information is coming to the surface and some lack of clarity, or as Alex was saying, some pattern that you haven't been able to see, suddenly you're able to see, and it leads to maybe a blowout, maybe a breakup, maybe a conflict, or maybe a meaningful, a meaningful point of crisis and healing, in a relationship where it's like, yeah, this is, I kind of felt like something was off. That's a moon Neptune kind of eclipse in the 3rd house. Like I kind of felt something, but didn't know what it was. And I wonder if that isn't about some kind of peaking drama around things like marriage, relationships, family karma, in a kind of emotional tension that's really going to be building as the month goes on.
A catharsis point for sure. However it manifests, but a massive catharsis point. Yeah.
So like I said, Agatha Christie, it's a little heavy, but I think, especially Cancer, Capricorns with Sun or Moon around like 27 to 30 in these houses, like that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway, okay, let's go forward to Aquarius. Did I miss anyone? Did anyone want to say anything about that one?
I think we all talked.
No. Okay, good.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, so Aquarius, we've got the lunar eclipse in the 2nd with Mars in Cancer in the 6th.
Okay. Have you guys read The Great Work of Your Life or heard of it?
No.
It's a book. I obviously, because I asked if you'd read it. I believe the author is Stephen Covey. I had to read it for my yoga teacher training in like 2017, and it really stuck with me. I loved it. That was the phrase that came to mind when I thought about this eclipse in Pisces in the 2nd house. You're kind of coming to this realization about how you want to use your talents, how you want to use your resources, and maybe getting serious about that. What is the great work of my life and how am I going to achieve it? thinking about it from the overwhelm perspective, it could be it's time to get your finances in order. It's time to get your resources in order. Maybe it's not money. Maybe it's the stuff in your house. I don't know. But there's something maybe we're trying to corral or wrangle, whether that is your talents or your physical resources or your financial resources. Mars in the 6th makes me think about, and I think I said this, something similar. I don't remember which sign this was for, but how your discipline, your daily routines and rituals and discipline could help with that. It may not feel comfortable to do. Like being disciplined in any way, in any new way, is never comfortable, but we're talking about the 6th house. So it's, it's going to take some effort. And we're talking about Mars in Cancer. So it may not feel great at first, but I think that this is an opportunity to get very methodical, maybe ritualistic, even with like the things you must do, and letting that kind of carry you through where you might have given up before.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, Dana. I think I'm just looking at this from a much more general point of view, but just being like Aquarians or risings, when I work with them, you can see that brilliant brain that they have working overtime. There's like I'm putting all the pieces together. So I think Aquarians tend to be very used to the cerebral overwhelm and of information, then organizing information really well and systematically. This month, this is maybe just a plug from your friendly neighborhood yoga teacher, but it feels very important to be in your body, because these are very emotional transits that are moving through, and they may, especially with this eclipse, it may not be easy to sort of get a handle on it with the intellectual mind, to get a handle on it, to understand how it may not be systematic, and it may not be rational or logical in the sort of the order of things. So it feels like a period of time for Aquarians to like do practices that help you be in a space where you can work a little bit more with the flow of your emotional world, which is not always an easy space for air signs, but I think particularly Aquarius to function sometimes.
Right on. I am not going to add anything on this one because we are almost out of time, and I want to make sure we don't run over too much. I will be late for dinner, and that will mean that I get no horoscope ever again. So I'm just kidding. No, Ashley's pretty chill, but I don't want to press it. So
fair enough.
So we've got the lunar eclipse in Pisces in the 1st and Mars in Cancer in the 5th. This is, of course, an eclipse that's very personal for Pisceans. Anytime that you get eclipses in your 1st house, and these are going to be North Node eclipses, you are ready to let go of an old version of yourself and start working into a new version of yourself. This is the most cliched image, but it is the perfect one, which is like a snake shedding its skin, especially with Neptune. You think of just that like thin, like see-through, transparent. The other day I was in the garden and I was pulling out some tomatoes, and I found like beneath the tomatoes this really long, fat snake skin that had been shed. And I was like, oh wow, that is a big snake. And so anyway, I thought about it, and I was just like, this tomato is going to hit a little different tonight when we put it in our salad. and that's the thing about an eclipse in your 1st house. These were called the serpent. The nodes of the moon were like a serpent. And when it moves through your 1st house, it is the desire to come out of an old skin because there's a new you. And that makes for very magical, like slightly ominous, just like the snake skin. It's like, do I look at this and do I get freaked out, or do I look at it and I think this is going to be a magical salad? And I'm serious when I say that when I saw that, I could have gotten grossed out, freaked out. I could have gone Plutonian and been like, oh my God, it's a bad omen. I'm not going to eat this tomato that I just plucked from like right above the snake skin. But I was like, nope, this is good. This is a good omen. This is magical, because snakes are also very magical creatures of transformation. I think, as far as I can tell, nothing magical or unfortunate happened either way with the salad. So I don't know if it even mattered. But for you, Pisceans, I think it will. I think it will matter if you start looking at the shedding of skin, the death and rebirth. Saturn's going to be finishing in your 1st house in the next year or so. Like you're in you're coming into a window of time where you really get to say, I'm done. I'm done with this lack of health. I'm going to get healthy. I'm done with the way I don't like how I feel about myself. I'm going to love myself. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to, move toward things that I want or desire and not back or shy away out of fear. They're very empowering, eclipses in the first house. So I think this is starting a process. The process could begin with overwhelm, right? It could begin with longing. It could begin with things that feel like, God, when it rains, it pours. I can't believe this. But it is just the start of a process of change that I think for you is going to feel really, really good if you give it like another year or so, with subsequent eclipses, Saturn finishing in your first. So there's a process of real intensification of the alchemy of Saturn in your first. It's going to begin with this eclipse. With Mars in Cancer in the fifth, it's interesting because for me, that speaks to looking at, our impulses when it comes to pleasure. Like, I think that there's an easy way in which Pisceans, I'm just going to use the example of emotional eating, because as a Cancer who often finds myself doing that when I'm stressed out, it's like you could look at that as a Mars in Cancer in the fifth kind of thing as well, where pleasure has to be like appropriately regulated. And the impulse toward pleasure with Mars in Cancer in the fifth could very much be connected to difficult emotions, or whatever wherever or however we're seeking pleasure. It's okay to do so if we're stressed out. That's a good thing to do. If you're stressed out, go have fun, but make sure that you're not doing it in a way that will further tax and drain you, because a Neptune eclipse in your first could very well do that if you're not sort of managing those impulses in the right way. Those are some of the things that come to my mind.
What keeps going through my head as you were talking, Adam, is the beginning of the real world, which was like when people stop being polite and start getting real. Like there's something about this with the Pisces, a first house eclipse, where it's like Pisces having that beautiful, compassionate, gentle side. But Saturn there with this eclipse might be saying, you can put that down. You don't have to be gentle, and you can set boundaries. You can say no. You can, and you can check out where Mars in the fifth house is saying, like, are you reacting to maybe not setting those boundaries in a way where it's like there's an impulsive emotional decision that may or may not be helpful, in discerning that out might be something to look at this month with that energy.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly add, I think about the passion of Mars in Cancer in the fifth, and like getting passionate about fun again, especially knowing Saturn's been in the first for a little while now. It's still there, obviously. Like, what is fun for you, and how can you bring that into this new person that you're becoming? Especially as you yourself are changing, like that also might be changing. So how can you bring pleasure into this as part of this new manifestation of you?
Love that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think like one last little thing that comes to my mind, dovetailing off from what Dana said, is that sometimes the reason that we need to change is as simple as recognizing, like, I'm not feeling super happy, and I can feel happy. So how do I do that? And like just starting to get serious about that. It's a weird thing to get serious about, but when people get serious about feeling good, that is commonly what happens when Saturn's starting to finish its work in the first house. I'm serious about my pleasure, my joy, my happiness, self-care, stuff like that. So then Cancer can be advocating for that right now as well. It's maybe one of the better ways of thinking about it, really. Okay, well, we made it through. We did it. We completed all 12 signs.
And you're on time for dinner?
I am going to be on time
getting
for
Adam
dinner.
off to dinner.
Yeah, but not before because my Cancer rising wife, who has a stellium of planets in Aries, is very sensitive and also impatient at times. I'll be honest. I'll go down and she's just the most. She gets stuff from her garden. It's all nice, but if I'm like really late, she'll be like, not cool. It's like my grandma. I was born on the same day as my grandma. She's a Cancer with a bunch of Aries energy, and my wife reminds me of her a little bit. And like, if you were late to dinner, I remember one time when I was like a kid, and I was late to dinner by half an hour. And I was visiting my grandma with a friend of mine, and I came into the kitchen, and she was, I'll never forget, she was holding a fly swatter, just like shaking, because she liked to swat the flies in the kitchen. She was just shaking, and tears were streaming down her face, and she was like, I told you 6:30. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I am never going to be late again. Yeah. So anyway, she's not
Sorry.
that bad. No, my wife is not. What's the woman's name from Misery? What was her name?
Oh, it's Annie something.
Kathy. The actress is
Kathy Bates.
Oh,
Kathy Bates. Yeah,
Bates.
she's not.
Yeah,
she doesn't go that crazy. All right, so let's promote our wonderful guests. I want you to find Dana at Self Help Witch on Instagram, where you can follow her astrological updates and stay tuned for all of her latest content. You are going to also find Dana on selfhelpwitch.com, where I believe you can book a reading with her. Is that right, Dana? You have readings available?
I do.
Okay, good. Yep. Those are the two places. So Instagram, Self-Help Witch, selfhelpwitch.com. And then Mr. Alex is Alex Amorosi Healing on Instagram, and alexamorosi.com if you want to check out his website and book a reading. I recommend it if you want to look at these transits, the eclipse, take a look at some of the Mars retrograde themes in your chart. These are wonderful people to do so with, and I know you won't regret that. They're great readers as well as great colleagues. So I'm really so thankful for both of you being here. And I can actually hear my daughter in the other room, which means my wife sent her up to check on me. So I must go. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Take it easy, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Everyone.